Everything you know about how information works will become obsolete within the next 7 years. Not gradually, the way film cameras became obsolete over 2 decades. Abruptly, the way the telegram became obsolete within 5 years of the telephone. The institutions, platforms, and methods through which you currently receive, process, and transmit information are entering a restructuring phase that will leave most of them unrecognizable by 2033. This is not speculation. It is a pattern. It has happened before, twice, under the exact same astronomical configuration. And on April 26th, the configuration returns. Uranus enters Gemini. This happens once every 84 years. The last time was 1942. Before that, 1858. Before that, 1774. Each time Uranus entered this specific sector of the zodiac, 3 things broke. Not randomly, the same 3 things. Every time, in the same order. Across completely different technological and cultural contexts. The 3 things are how information is received, how people communicate with each other, and how decisions are made based on information. When these 3 things break simultaneously, the world that existed before the transit ceases to exist, not through catastrophe, but through obsolescence. The old world does not collapse, it becomes irrelevant, replaced by a new configuration that operates on different principles. Let me walk through the data. 1858. Uranus enters Gemini. Within 7 years, the following occurs. The transatlantic telegraph cable is successfully laid. For the first time in human history, information crosses the Atlantic in minutes rather than weeks. The immediate consequence: the nature of news changes. Previously, news was a narrative. By the time a report from London reached New York, it was a story, shaped by the journalist who carried it. The telegraph made news instantaneous and fragmentary, short bursts of data, not shaped narratives. This is not a minor shift. It restructured the relationship between the public and information. Suddenly, raw data was available before interpretation. People began making decisions based on fragments rather than stories. The stock market transformed. Prices could now be transmitted across oceans in real time, creating the first global financial network. Banking restructured around the telegraph. Diplomacy restructured. Military strategy restructured. Every domain that depended on information, which is every domain, was forced to adapt to a new transmission speed. In the same transit window, Charles Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species in 1859. This is not accidental timing, it is a restructuring of how knowledge itself is organized. Before Darwin, the dominant knowledge framework was taxonomic and static. Species were fixed categories. Reality was classified and stable. After Darwin, the framework became evolutionary and dynamic. Categories were fluid. Reality was in motion. And the organizing principle shifted from classification to adaptation. The way people understood information about the natural world, the foundational layer of all knowledge, was restructured. Not updated, restructured. The old framework did not receive an amendment. It was replaced. In the same window, the American Civil War, 1861 through 65. Whatever the political and moral dimensions of the conflict, and they are immense, the structural dimension relevant here is communication. The Civil War was the first major conflict fought with telegraph infrastructure. Orders transmitted in real time. Intelligence gathered and distributed at speed. The military communication architecture that emerged from the Civil War became the template for every subsequent conflict, and for the civilian communication infrastructure that followed. The way decisions were made based on information, the third element that breaks during Uranus and Gemini, was permanently altered. Decisions accelerated, reaction times compressed. The deliberation period that previously separated information from action was shortened from weeks to hours. Now, 1942. Uranus enters Gemini again, 84 years later. Within 7 years, the following occurs. Radar becomes operational at scale, not as a laboratory curiosity, but as a deployed military infrastructure that restructures how spatial information is received. Before radar, knowing where something was required seeing it or hearing it. After radar, information about position was available without direct sensory contact. This is a fundamental restructuring of how information is received, the first of the 3 elements. The implications extended far beyond the military. Radar technology spawned air traffic control, weather prediction, eventually satellite imaging. Every domain that depended on knowing where things are, which is every domain, adapted to a new information modality. Enigma decryption, Bletchley Park, Alan Turing. The breaking of encrypted communication and the simultaneous development of early computational machines. This restructured how people communicate, the second element. Before Enigma, secure communication meant physical security, locked pouches, trusted couriers, sealed rooms, wax seals. The assumption was that security was material. If the container was secure, the message was secure. Turing's work inverted this assumption. Security became mathematical. A message could travel through completely open channels, intercepted, copied, held by the enemy, and still be secure if the mathematics of its encryption was sound. This is not an incremental improvement. It is a categorical restructuring of what communication means. The message and its security were separated. The medium became irrelevant. The mathematics became everything. And from Turing's work at Bletchley came the foundational concepts that built the next 84 years of human information infrastructure. The Turing machine, stored program architecture, the theoretical framework for every digital device that would follow. The personal computer, the smartphone, the internet, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, all of it traces a direct structural lineage back to the work done during Uranus in Gemini in the 1940s. The way people communicate was restructured from analog to digital. Not in 1942, not immediately, but the seed was planted during the transit, and everything that followed grew from that seed. The transit does not produce instant transformation. It produces the seed of a 7 to 84-year restructuring. The atomic bomb, 1945. This restructured how decisions are made based on information, the third element. Before the bomb, decisions about conflict and security were made based on assessments of military capability. How many troops, how many tanks, how many ships. These assessments were quantitative and symmetrical. Both sides measured, both sides compared. The side with more resources had the advantage. The analysis was complex but linear. After the bomb, a single piece of information, does the other side have the capability to destroy us entirely, restructured all decision-making. Not just military, geopolitical, economic, scientific, cultural. The Cold War, the defining decision-making framework of the next 45 years, was entirely shaped by one piece of information and the decisions it forced. The concept of mutually assured destruction is not a military doctrine. It is a decision-making architecture. It says, the decision is no longer based on comparative advantage. It is based on threshold. Can the other side cross the threshold of total destruction? If yes, the decision matrix changes completely. Every subsequent conflict, negotiation, alliance, trade agreement, scientific investment, and cultural exchange from 1945 to 1991 was filtered through this restructured decision-making architecture. One piece of information restructured how an entire civilization makes decisions for half a century. Also in this transit window, the founding of the United Nations in 1945. The Bretton Woods financial architecture, the dollar as global reserve currency, the IMF, the World Bank in 1944. The partition of India in 1947. The creation of Israel in 1948. The beginning of the Cold War, the Marshall Plan, the Berlin blockade. Each of these is, at its core, a restructuring of how information flows between entities, nations, economies, peoples, and how decisions are made based on that information. The 7 years of Uranus in Gemini from 1942 to 1949 did not merely produce events, they produced the operating parameters for the next 84 years. The entire institutional, informational, and communicational infrastructure of the modern world was built during this transit. The world that existed before 1942, colonial empires, analog communication, symmetrical warfare, physics without nuclear capability, ceased to exist. Not through a single catastrophe. Through a 7-year restructuring that made the old world obsolete. Piece by piece, element by element, until the sum of the changes produced a world that the 1939 version of humanity would not recognize. That is the pattern. Every 84 years, the same 3 elements: information reception, communication architecture, decision-making framework. All 3 break. All 3 are rebuilt on new principles. And the principles that emerge from the restructuring define the operating parameters for the next 84 years until Uranus returns to Gemini and the cycle runs again. The pattern is not random disruption. It is systematic obsolescence followed by systematic replacement. The old way of receiving information does not merely compete with the new, it becomes structurally incapable of functioning in the new environment. The telegraph did not compete with physical mail for speed. It made the concept of waiting days for information structurally obsolete. Radar did not compete with visual spotting for accuracy. It made the concept of needing to see something in order to know it was there structurally obsolete. Each transition eliminates an entire category of limitation. And the people, institutions, and economies that were optimized around that limitation find their optimizations suddenly meaningless. This is why the transitions feel violent even when they are not. It is not that something is destroyed, it is that something is made irrelevant. And irrelevance, for a person or an institution that has invested decades in mastering the old parameters, feels worse than destruction. Destruction is dramatic. Irrelevance is quiet. It does not announce itself. It simply stops calling. April 26, 2026. Uranus enters Gemini. The cycle returns, and this time it enters at firehorse speed, the fastest execution year in the 60-year Chinese cycle, during a period of 0 retrograde planets. The combination has not occurred before, not in 1858, not in 1942. Both previous transits began in years of moderate execution speed with mixed retrograde conditions. This one begins in a year of maximum execution speed, with 0 transmission distortion. The restructuring will begin faster. The new parameters will become visible sooner. The window for adaptation will be narrower. And the early movers will capture a proportionally larger premium. 3 projections. Not predictions. Projections based on the historical pattern applied to the current technological and cultural environment. Each projection maps the restructuring of one of the 3 elements into the specific context of 2026 through 2033. Projection 1. The definition of expert restructures. In the current information architecture, an expert is someone who knows, who has accumulated knowledge over years or decades and dispenses it from a position of informational asymmetry. They know something you do not. This model has been the foundation of professional expertise, academic authority, medical practice, legal counsel, financial advising, and every form of paid knowledge work since the professionalization of knowledge in the 19th century. The doctor knows medicine, the lawyer knows law, the consultant knows the industry. The expert's value is proportional to the difficulty of acquiring what they know. Within the next 7 years, this model becomes obsolete. Not because experts become unnecessary, the need for specialized judgment increases, not decreases. Because the bottleneck shifts. When AI can access, synthesize, and present any existing body of knowledge in seconds, and do so with accuracy that matches or exceeds the average practitioner in most factual domains, the value of knowing things drops toward zero. The new expert is not someone who knows, it is someone who asks. Someone who can formulate the right question. The question that produces the answer no one else thought to seek. The question that combines two domains that have never been combined. The question that identifies the gap in the available data. The question that reframes the problem so that the available answers become relevant in a way they were not before. The value shifts from storage to query, from memory to framing, from having the information to knowing what to do with a specific combination of information that has never been combined before. This is not an abstract prediction, it is already measurable. The most effective users of AI tools in 2025 and 2026 are not the most knowledgeable in their fields. They are the most skilled at formulating prompts, at knowing what to ask, how to constrain the query, and how to evaluate the output against criteria the AI cannot generate on its own. A radiologist who has memorized 10,000 imaging patterns is outperformed by an AI that has analyzed 10 million. But a radiologist who can look at an AI-flagged anomaly and ask, quote, 3, that question is beyond the AI's training set. That question is the new expertise, not the knowledge, the query, the ability to see what the machine does not see. Not because the machine lacks data, but because the machine lacks the framing. The restructuring is already beginning. By 2033, it will be complete. And every professional who built their career architecture on "I know things others do not" will need to rebuild it around "I ask questions others cannot." The transition is survivable. The London traders who survived the 1966 restructuring were not the ones who knew the most about the old market parameters. They were the ones who asked, what if the parameters have changed before anyone else thought to ask? What this means for the architect's declaration. If the vocational component of the March specification relies on expertise as knowledge, on being the person who knows, the architecture has a 7-year expiration date. Not tomorrow, 7 years. But the depreciation begins now, accelerates under the firehorse, and becomes irreversible around 2029. The person who updates the model, from knowing to asking, from storage to query, retains their value and multiplies it. The person who defends the old model watches the market premium for knowing things erode year by year until the model becomes economically unviable. Projection 2. Communication monopolies begin fragmenting. The current communication architecture is monopolistic. A small number of platforms, 5, arguably 3, control the majority of human-to-human digital communication on the planet. These platforms determine not only how people communicate, but what they communicate about. Through algorithms that prioritize certain types of content and suppress others. They determine who is visible and who is invisible, who reaches an audience and who is filtered out. The platforms are not neutral infrastructure. They are communication gatekeepers with business models that depend on controlling the flow. Every Uranus and Gemini transit broke the existing communication monopoly. The telegraph broke the monopoly of physical mail carriers. Suddenly, the postal service was no longer the only way to transmit information across distances. Newspapers that had relied on mail delivery for news found their model disrupted within a decade. Radio broke the monopoly of print. Suddenly, information could bypass the printing press entirely and reach audiences in real time through the air. Print newspapers that had controlled public information for a century found their monopoly cracked. The Internet, which emerged from the computational seed planted during the 1942 transit, broke the monopoly of broadcast media. Television networks that had controlled the information diet of entire nations found their audiences fragmenting. The pattern is consistent. The old monopoly does not disappear. It diminishes. Print still exists, radio still exists, television still exists, but none of them holds the monopoly it once did. The new medium captures the growth. The old medium retains a shrinking base. The transition takes roughly 7 years, the duration of the Uranus transit, and by the end, the new communication architecture is dominant. The next break, beginning in 2026, targets the monopoly of centralized social platforms. The structural inevitability is visible. Decentralized communication protocols are emerging, not yet dominant, not yet user-friendly, but structurally viable. Blockchain-based social layers that cannot be censored or algorithmically controlled. Federated networks that distribute control among users rather than concentrating it in a corporate entity. AI-mediated content creation and distribution that bypasses platform gatekeepers entirely, allowing a person to produce, target, and distribute content without any platform's permission or algorithmic approval. None of these are dominant yet. Some may fail, others may merge, but the structural direction, from centralized to distributed communication, is the same direction that every previous Uranus and Gemini transit produced. The telegraph was decentralization of the postal monopoly. Radio was decentralization of the print monopoly. The internet was decentralization of the broadcast monopoly. The next layer is decentralization of the platform monopoly. By 2033, at least one of these emerging alternatives, or something that has not yet been built but follows the same structural logic, will be a primary communication channel. Not the only one, but a primary one, large enough that building an audience on it is commercially viable. The restructuring of communication monopolies affects every person and every enterprise that depends on a platform to reach an audience. If the architect's declaration includes a financial or vocational component that depends on a specific platform, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, a specific marketplace, the architecture has a dependency on infrastructure that is entering a restructuring phase. This does not mean abandon the platform tomorrow. It means begin building platform-independent audience infrastructure now. An email list, a direct relationship with the audience that does not pass through a centralized gatekeeper. A communication architecture that survives the restructuring of the monopoly it currently depends on. The people who build this parallel infrastructure in 2026 will be positioned for the transition. The people who build it in 2030 will be 3 years late. Projection 3. The concept of quote 7 is replaced by quote 8. This is the deepest of the 3 projections and the one that will meet the most resistance because it challenges something most people treat as foundational. That learning is an investment that appreciates over time. That a degree is a permanent asset. That expertise accumulates. That the more you know, the more valuable you become. In the current information architecture, knowledge is treated as a durable asset. A degree represents accumulated knowledge. A book represents stable information. An expert's opinion represents tested and reliable understanding. Knowledge has shelf life, measured in years, sometimes decades. A medical degree from 2010 is still considered valid in 2026. A law degree from 1998 still qualifies a person to practice. An engineering certification from 2005 still holds weight in a hiring decision. The assumption is durability. What was true when learned remains true, or at least relevant, for decades. Within the next 7 years, the shelf life of most knowledge compresses to months. In some domains, artificial intelligence, financial technology, geopolitical strategy, health optimization, it is already compressed to weeks. The acceleration is driven by the same AI restructuring from projection 1. When new synthesis is generated continuously, when research findings are published and superseded within the same quarter, when a best practice from 6 months ago is not established wisdom, but outdated methodology, the synthesis from 6 months ago is not old knowledge, it is expired data. The distinction between knowledge and data collapses. What remains is currency, the freshness of the information, not its depth. A concrete example, A marketing professional who learned social media strategy in 2021 and has not updated since is operating with expired data. Not slightly outdated, structurally expired. The algorithms changed. The audience behaviors shifted. The platforms restructured their monetization models. The strategies that produced results in 2021 produced different results or no results in 2026. 5 years. In previous eras, 5 years of strategic knowledge was still valuable. In the current acceleration, 5 years of strategic knowledge is archaeological. This projection does not mean learning becomes useless. It means the definition of learning changes. Learning as accumulation, reading books, attending courses, storing information, depreciates. Learning as velocity, the speed at which a person can acquire, integrate, apply, and then replace information before it expires, appreciates. The skill that holds value in the new architecture is not how much you know, it is how fast you can learn the next thing, and then the next, and then the next. The refresh rate of the learner becomes the primary measure of informational value, not the depth of the archive. The practical implication is stark. The architect's declaration that specifies a career built on accumulated expertise, 20 years of knowledge in a specific domain, faces the same structural challenge as a business model built on physical mail in 1859. The knowledge is real. The expertise is genuine. The market premium for it is entering a phase of accelerated erosion, not disappearance, erosion. The domain expert who also has high learning velocity survives and thrives. The domain expert who relies solely on accumulated knowledge watches their premium shrink each year. The declaration that specifies a career built on learning velocity and adaptive capacity, the ability to acquire new configurations faster than they expire, positions the architect on the correct side of the restructuring. Here is where this connects to the personal architecture built since March. The architect's declaration was written for a 30-year cycle. That cycle now includes, in its first 7 years, a restructuring of the information layer that everything else sits on top of. The financial patterns from Video 8 operate through information, pricing, negotiation, market positioning. All of it depends on the information architecture. The relational architecture depends on communication, and the communication infrastructure is entering a restructuring phase. The vocational specification requires a knowledge model, and the knowledge model is being replaced by something faster, more fluid, and less durable. All 3 domains of the declaration, financial, relational, vocational, are affected by the Uranus transit. Not invalidated, affected. The declaration remains structurally sound. The foundation poured in March holds. But the wiring, the information, communication, and decision-making wiring that connects the personal architecture to the broader infrastructure needs to be specified for a building that will exist in 2033, not in 2025. This does not require a new declaration. It requires an interface update. The same way a building does not need to be demolished when the electrical grid upgrades from one voltage standard to another, it needs a transformer. The transformer in this context is the awareness that the information environment the architecture operates in is entering a 7-year restructuring. The foundation, walls, and layout remain. The wiring adapts. Practically, this means 3 adjustments to the architect's declaration, not rewrites, adjustments. First, review the vocational component. Does it specify expertise as knowledge or expertise as query? If knowledge, add a query dimension. What questions can this expertise ask that no one else is asking? Second, review the communication dependencies. Does the architecture rely on a single platform or a single communication channel? If yes, add a platform-independent layer, a direct relationship with the audience or the market that does not pass through a centralized intermediary. Third, review the knowledge assumptions. Does the specification treat any body of knowledge as permanently valuable? If yes, add a refresh rate. How often does this knowledge need updating? And what is the mechanism for that update? These three adjustments do not change the architecture. They future-proof it. They ensure that the building being constructed at firehorse speed in 2026 is wired for the information environment of 2033, not for the one that is currently becoming obsolete. The 7-year positioning assessment is in the Telegram channel. 3 questions, 1 per projection, with a framework for evaluating and adjusting each dimension of the declaration. Complete it before May, because May adds a layer of complexity that this video has not yet addressed. Now, why this matters right now? Not in 7 years, right now. Not even next month, this week. Because the firehorse does not give 7 years to adapt. The firehorse gives months. In a normal year, Uranus entering Gemini would produce gradual shifts, visible trends that unfold over years, with plenty of time to observe, assess, and reposition. In a firehorse year, the preview of the 7-year restructuring arrives in compressed form within the first calendar year. The early signals of all 3 projections will be visible by the end of 2026, not as theoretical trends, but as concrete events that affect income, communication reach, and professional positioning. The people who position now, in April, in the clean window, with the calibrated blueprint and the cleared transmission, will navigate the restructuring from a position of architectural alignment. They will be the equivalent of the London traders who noticed the 1966 rotation before the models broke. The people who wait for the restructuring to become obvious, for the platforms to fragment, for the expert model to visibly fail, for the knowledge shelf life to compress in their specific domain, will position after the early movers have captured the premium. The gap between early positioning and late positioning is not linear. It is compounding. A 6-month head start in a firehorse year produces a 3 to 5 year advantage in structural positioning. That is not a metaphor. That is the mathematics of first mover advantage under acceleration. The cycle has launched. 7 years. The 3 elements are already beginning to crack: information reception, communication architecture, decision-making framework. The same 3 that cracked in 1858 and 1942. The pattern does not negotiate. It does not ask for readiness. It runs. And in May, a corridor opens that will compress even this acceleration further. Pluto turns retrograde on May 6th. When Pluto changes direction, it is not weather or mood that shifts. It is the ground everything stands on. The last time Pluto reversed in a new sign was 2024. Look at what happened then. Now imagine that at firehorse speed during a 7-year Uranus restructuring. The preliminary map for May, what to close before May 6th, what to lock in, what to prepare, is the next video. The world you knew is restructuring. Your architecture needs to restructure with it.